This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi. As we prepare for Parshas Terumah, Agon Chodesh, the great Malbim, the Meir Leibish Malbim, was once at a venue where he had to speak immediately following a Reform rabbi. So after the Reform rabbi concluded his drasha, or speech, the Malbim gets up to speak, and he begins with the following. Sefer Koheles, Shlomo HaMelech tells us about the various times in life. He says, L'kol zman ve'eis l'chol chayfetz tachas hashemayim. There are 28 times in this world. Shlomo HaMelech tells us, Eis livkois ve'eis l'schoik, there's a time to cry, time to laugh. Eis svoid ve'eis rakoid, a time to eulogize, a time to dance. And the Malbim pointed out that there is one pasuk here that is very, very puzzling. Eis lachashois ve'eis l'daber, a time to be silent and a time to speak. He says, you see, all the other times are polar opposites. Time to dance, a time to eulogize, a time to cry, a time to laugh. Eis lehoiv ve'eis l'snai, a time to love and a time to hate. They are polar opposites, exact opposites, but they have a happy median. There is something in between. There is something in the middle. What's in the middle of love and hate? Indifference. I don't care. You could love something, you could hate something, and there's something in between. You're indifferent. All these extreme opposites have an in-between. But when it comes to eis lachashos, eis l'daber, a time to be silent, a time to speak, there's nothing in between. Either your mouth is talking or your mouth is not talking. Either you're quiet or you're talking. There's nothing in between talking and not talking. Says the Malbim, I'm so grateful that I heard this Reform rabbi speak, because now I have a new insight into life. Now I know there is a median between speaking and not speaking. Speaking without saying anything. That's the happy median. The Malbim lived from the year 1800 to 1880. He's one of the all-time great Gedolei Yisrael. People are not makir. The great, and the Malbim was on a completely different pedestal. The Malbim, at the age of 20 years old, he began working on his Sefer Halacha, the Artzos HaChaim. Mishnah Berurah quotes the Artzos HaChaim in many, many places. And for the Chafetz Chaim personally, the Malbim was the paragon of what a goyin is. In other words, in the eyes of the Chafetz Chaim, what was a gadol b'Yisrael? The Malbim. In fact, the Chafetz Chaim was always heard saying, how is it possible to be zoicha, to have a mind like the Malbim? Whenever the Chafetz Chaim would talk about a great mind, he would talk about the Malbim. In fact, in the Chafetz Chaim's introduction to the Taras Koyanim, Chafetz Chaim writes how the Malbim explained how Chazal were able to make every drasha. Chafetz Chaim said, this is something only a gadol like the Malbim could do, not an ish pashut kamaini, not someone simple like me. So in the eyes of the Chafetz Chaim, the preeminent mind was the Malbim. The Malbim's most well-known contribution is his commentary to Tanakh, where he explains the inextricable connection between the Torah Shebechsav and the Torah Shebal Peh, that you can't learn Tanakh without the Torah Shebal Peh. And the Malbim valiantly fought against the Reform and the Haskalah, and they were roidef him. They made accusations against him because of the Maskilim. The Malbim was put in jail. He had to run for his life. The Malbim was viewed as the strongest threat to the Haskalah. In the Olam HaYeshivas, in the Yeshiva world, the greatness of the Malbim has been expressed in the following way. There are three Achronim that have the power, the Koyach HaChidush of Rishonim. In fact, the Briskers say this. So who are these three Achronim? Number one, of course, Reb Chaim Brisker, right? This is what the Briskers say. Number two, the Vilna Gaon. And number three, the Malbim. The Malbim, they say, has the Koyach HaChidush of a Rishon. And in fact, there's a pasuk in Tehillim that none of the Mefarshim explain. Even the Rishonim are not able to explain it. Says the Beis Halevi, the Malbim is the only one who's able to explain this pasuk, and he could have only explained the pasuk Beruach HaKodesh. I heard from my grandfather, my father's father, Zal Gesundsein, who his grandfather, I believe his name was Pesach Moshe Goldman, so my great-great-grandfather, was the Moira Hayra. He was the Paisik in the city where the Malbim was the Rav. He was very close with the Malbim, and in fact, because of that, my grandfather, Zal Gesundsein, is a very big baki in the Malbim. He told me that if you never learned the Malbim on Shir Hashirim, You didn't live. You didn't live. That's what my grandfather told me. My grandfather said, he heard, and this is written in Svarim, when the Malbim passed away, the Chevra Kadisha came in to bury him. They lifted off the cover. They were almost blinded by a light that emanated from the body of the Malbim, and they were shaking. They had to wait a very long time to be able to go bury the Malbim, because the whole house was filled with light. That's what's reported. Says the Malbim on this week's Parsha. In relation to this week's Parsha, the Malbim could be found in Sefer Malachim Aleph, Parakeh, Pasuk Yud Zayin. Why didn't Hashem let David HaMelech build the Beis HaMikdash? Why only Shlomo? So we're accustomed to thinking, because David HaMelech, he was a man of war, his hands were dirtied, were sullied with blood. Says the Malbim, no, that's not what it means. There's a different reason entirely why the Malbim, there's a different reason entirely why David HaMelech could not build the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Malbim, a very important part of building the Beis HaMikdash is you have to build it lishma. You have to build it l'shem shamayim. You have to build it for the sake of Hashem, without any ulterior motives. Like we say in this week's Parsha. V'yasu li mikdash. Li, what does Rashi say? Lishmi. You have to build the Beis HaMikdash purely for the sake of Hashem. That is a critical part of building the Beis HaMikdash. Not for self-aggrandizement, not because you want to be able to say, I built the Mikdash, not because you want honor, not because you want praise, not for any ulterior motive. You have to build the Beis HaMikdash l'shem shamayim. You know why David could not build the Beis HaMikdash? Whose heart was more pure than David? David HaMelech is the one who says, Leif tahar barali eleikim. David is the one who says, Libi uvesari yoraninu l'kel chai. Whose heart was more pure than David? Says the Malbim, there's one problem. Nasan Hanavi tells David, he promises him, that when the Beis HaMikdash is built, it will usher in an era of peace. An era of peace and tranquility for Klal Yisrael. As pure as David's heart was, and as much he would have been able to build the Beis HaMikdash l'shma, purely for the honor of Hashem, it would have been nearly impossible for David not to allow his mind to entertain the thought that he has something to gain by building the Beis HaMikdash. Because David HaMelech had many enemies. Enemies from foreign enemies, Aram Tzova, the Plishtim. Internal enemies, Avshalom, other generals. His life was in constant turmoil. It would have been nearly impossible for David to build the Beis HaMikdash and not think, you know what? Yes, this is for Hashem, but I'm also going to gain, because it's going to bring me shalom, it's going to bring me peace. And therefore, since the Beis HaMikdash had to be built l'shma, David could not do it. As great of a tzaddik as he was, but since he had something so great to gain, his mind would not have been able to veer off from that motive. But Shlomo HaMelech, who anyway lived in tranquility and peace, and anyway the Navi promised that during Shlomo's life he would be an Ish Menucha, so he had nothing personal to gain from building the Beis HaMikdash, because he enjoyed peace anyway. He would be the perfect choice to build the Beis HaMikdash. He would have been able to muster up the Taras Halev, the purity of heart, to build the Beis HaMikdash purely l'shma. In other words, it's not that David's hands were sullied with blood. It's because David was an Ish Milchama. He had so much battle and war, he could not overcome the tremendous temptation to think, I have something to get, I have something to gain from building the Beis HaMikdash. The Malbim brings into focus a very important concept. The concept of Taras HaMachshava, purity of thought. That when we do a mitzvah, when you daven, when you learn, when you do a chesed, you have to do it purely l'shem shamayim. Not because someone's going to think I'm a tzaddik, someone's going to praise me, someone's going to have a nice thing to say about me. Now we're talking about a very high madrega over here. Because human being, when they get praise, they're going to do the mitzvah a little bit better. But we're talking about a very high level. But you have to know what you're striving for. You have to know what we're shooting for. If you don't shoot for the stars, you're not going to go anywhere. You have to know we're shooting for the highest level here. Taras HaMachshava. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter would say, his whole life he strove to be like the Vilna Gaon. That's how he became Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Please allow me to read to you the holy words of the Mesilas Yesharim. Mesilas Yesharim, in Parak Tezayin, he says the following, very important. He says, Lefamim Adam Hoylech Va'oisa Mitzvah Lishma Mamish. Often a person may he's headed to do a tremendous mitzvah, and he's doing it Lishma. The reason he's doing the mitzvah is because Shekach Gazar Avinu Shabashmayim. Why am I taking the lulav? I'm not doing it for an ulterior motive. I'm doing it l'shem Hashem. Why am I davening with kavana? I'm doing it l'shem Shamayim. Amnam. Lo yechdau milashatef ima eza pni acheres. But the person doesn't refrain from also having other thoughts. In other words, yeah, I'm davening for Hashem. But look at me, everyone. Look, I want everyone to see how beautiful I daven. What a big Baal Chesed I am. I'm running to do a Chesed. But when I think that people are going to think of me as a big Baal Chesed, so I'm also thinking about that. Look, we're only human. And that's a very normal thing to think. But now we're talking about the highest level. We don't refrain from having other thoughts. Maybe someone will praise me. Or Hashem, yeah, I'm doing the mitzvah, but I'm going to get Gan Eden. That's also not the highest level. Now listen to this. Sometimes a person will do a mitzvah, and a person's not having any thoughts. I don't care if people praise me, they don't praise me. I'm doing the mitzvah completely l'shem shamayim. Amna. He says like this. B'sameach liboy al hashavach v'rabba yarba l'daktik yoser. But in the back of your mind, you hear someone praise you, so you do the mitzvah a little bit better. That's not why you're doing it. You're doing it l'shem shamayim. But the extra praise, the extra honor you're getting, that motivates you a little bit more. Now, says Mesilas Yesharim, even though this impure thought is so small, and 99% of my thoughts are purely l'shem shamayim, it's only 1%. So says Mesilas Yesharim, even though this thought, this ulterior motive is batel b'miyutai, nevertheless, tahar legamri einenu, you still have not done the mitzvah completely pure. Says Mesilas Yesharim, when you bring a carbon mincha, the flour has to be strained in the strainer 13 times. Sift it, re-sift it, re-sift it, re-sift it. You know why? Because if you're putting the flour on the mizbeach, Hashem only loves pure flour. So too when you do a mitzvah, you have to contemplate, you have to analyze my thoughts. What are my motivations? Until you're able to do the mitzvah 100% l'shem shamayim. Says the Mesilas Yesharim, I'm not saying that if you don't do it 100% l'shem shamayim, Hashem's going to reject the mitzvah. No! Hashem rewards for a mitzvah even if you do the mitzvah for praise completely. Even if you come running to shul to be the first one in shul because you want everyone to say you were the first one in shul, you're going to get Gan Eden, no question. We're not talking about whether you're getting schar for it. Amnam al ha'avoida ha'temima ani medaber, says Mesilas Yesharim. But what I'm telling you about, I'm talking about the perfect service. Haru'uya l'chol oyavei Hashem emes. If you really love the Ribono Shel Olam, then it's not enough just to do a mitzvah to get schar. You want the mitzvah to be tamim. And a mitzvah that is tamim is only tamim if it's completely tahar, free from any ulterior motive. Now listen to this. Says Mesilas Yesharim, we have so many gedolim throughout our history. You have achronim, you have rishonim, you have gaonim, amoram, tanoim, neviim, and then you have the avos. We can't even imagine the achronim. What a Tana is, what a Navi is, we can't even begin to contemplate their toenails. What was the difference between Avraham Avinu, Yitzchak Avinu, Yaakov, and the Nevi'im? We know, more than anybody else in history, Hashem loved the Avos. Hashem loved David. How was Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and David greater than Nevi'im? Greater than Rishonim? What, they did more mitzvahs? No. In action, they didn't do more. Says Mesilas Yesharim, I'm going to tell you the difference between the Avos and even Tanoim and Amaram. You know what the difference is? You know how Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov endeared themselves to their Creator more than anyone else? Mi sheyoidea letaher libay yoiser. If you know how to purify your heart more, hu hamiskarev yoiser v'ha'ohav yoiser etzlo yisbarach, then you're more beloved to Hashem. The difference between Avram Avinu and Tanoim was not more chesed, more Torah. The difference is the purity of heart. That when Avraham Avinu did a mitzvah, it was 100% l'shem shamayim, as opposed to 99.99%. That's what we're striving for. Like the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Rachmana li babai. That certainly, this is a major challenge. We see from the Malbim that because David HaMelech stand to gain from the Beis HaMikdash, Hashem said, sorry David, I can't let you build the Beis HaMikdash because for you it would be impossible to build it l'shem shamayim. But nevertheless, as much as we can, to try to do the mitzvahs, not for an ulterior motive, we're svalal to the Ribbanu Shalom, v'taher libeinu li'avdecha be'emes. When we say purify our hearts to serve you in truth, we're talking about to be able to serve Hashem completely clear of any ulterior motives. And Ribbanu Shalom should give us siyata d'shmaya to serve Him be'emes. We should be zeicha l'cheinu l'chesed rachamim bracha v'atzlacha ad b'yaskel tzedek meher b'yameinu amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.